I'd like you to meet a friend of mine, David Stevens, that I have had the good pleasure of becoming more and more acquainted with through the MLK Appreciation Day Steering Committee and our work together. In conversations over the last 9 months, I've come to have really a deep appreciation for David, for his spirit, for the work that he does, both professionally as well as a volunteer. And I wanted to have some time with him so that you could hear from him some of the things that I've learned from him. And so please meet David Stevens, and I've asked him to tell us a little bit about himself and what he does.
Good morning, everyone. As Pastor indicated, my name is David Stevens. I'm a native of Muskogee, Oklahoma, educated, born, raised, and educated there. I worked in the oil and gas industry for a number of years, moved to Plano in 1999, and have lived in Plano ever since. Today, my career is mainly involved in doing consulting work for small businesses, particularly in the agriculture industry, working with rural business owners, rural landowners, and ag producers. I'm a member of Hill Chapel CME Church, where I serve as chairman of the steward board. I've been a member of that church since moving to Plano, and was a member of the CME Church in Tulsa, where I actually moved here from. In terms of community involvement, I found myself really involved with raising my sons, who are now grown and finished school and working in education here in North Texas, and working in the church, and not really that involved in the community, but recent events certainly has stirred some interest and some energy in that. I've always been a student of history in a sense, and certainly been involved in a family of activists in certain areas, and just started getting more and more involved, and had an opportunity to work with the group that put together the MLK celebration. And through that, I've met a lot of great people and been able to share some experiences and share some information, and certainly learn a lot. So I'm excited at the growth that I'm seeing here, and more excited at the interest that I'm seeing here.
Awesome. So just a few questions that I know members of my congregation would appreciate hearing from you as a result of your involvement and activism in the community and so forth. One question I have, I'm curious to know, what do you think of a congregation that's predominantly Caucasian that wants to build bridges with people of color, other parts of the community?
You know, when I hear that, I'm reminded before I moved here in Tulsa, one of the events we had annually was a pulpit swap, if you will, where in various areas of town we had predominantly white congregations and predominantly black congregations, which is a congregation group I was most familiar with, would swap pulpits on a Sunday, and those pastors would deliver the message in each other, and that was a great experience for a number of reasons. We got a chance to see and experience the message from a different speaker, and we got a chance to see a different style of worship from a different speaker. I think it's really great that there's a desire to do that. I was at a meeting recently, and there was a lot of talk about, man, why is it that we don't worship together? Why is it that we're segregated? Well, we're not segregated, we're just separated. And there's a difference in segregation and separation. Separation is a choice. Mm-hmm. Segregation was not a choice. And sometimes we hear terminology and we don't pay attention to it. And I think most important is that desire to know each other a little better is very important. Mm-hmm. That desire to not let Sunday or differences in our traditional religions or our traditional cultures keep us separated. So the desire to do that, I think, is most important. And how we do that, I think, is just start with a conversation with another church, another congregation, with another pastor. Reach out and say, hey, let's Bible study together. Let's share some experiences. I think the unknown is the biggest challenge we've got, is we just don't know, in some cases, each other, which is surprising, which is very surprising.
So you've been in Collin County, you've been in Plano since 1999, you've experienced life, you've raised your sons here, and where have you seen discrimination play out in our community?
You know, having raised two young men, African American young men in Plano, our church, Hill Chapel, was in the Douglas community, and it would be surprising to some people. One of my sons, Delani, in college, he had dreadlocks. And it was a struggle for me to help him understand that because of what he looks like, for some reason, that's why he's being stopped so much. He was not stopped as a driver in Plano prior to having dreadlocks, and he has not been stopped since he cut them off. But while he had dreadlocks, same kid, he's been stopped. Or he was stopped, a significant number of times. It wasn't until recently, my son is in his 30s now, he's a school teacher here in Plano. It wasn't until recently that he told me while in high school, the police officers would frequently follow him home in the evening. We lived in West Plano, and he said frequently they would literally follow him to the front door and sit and watch him go. And he never told me that before. He certainly knew he hadn't done anything wrong and didn't feel threatened by it. But in Duro, West Plano, my son was followed home often. Our church is in the Douglas community, and our pastor, when he first came to our church, was stopped by the police officer in Douglas, which is, quote unquote, a historically predominantly African American community of Plano, but also, according to the police, noted as a hotbed for criminal activity. I'm not sure what that may be, but my pastor was stopped. He was stopped so often that we asked members, and he asked members to contact the police department because he was new to Plano and say, hey, what do we need to do to get that stopped? So just in my immediate family and immediate church family, I know of those events that happened. I had an opportunity to sit on jury duty, and sometimes we don't recognize that sometimes things are not always fair and equal, and that's okay. But I witnessed when I was on grand jury duty that there seemed to be a particular desire to give certain groups of people a chance. Let's not true bill that, hey, this is a young kid in high school. But at the same time, another group of people, a young man or lady that may be part of the Hispanic community or African American, and you could kind of tell that by names or various things. There was not that much of a desire to be lenient with them, and that was kind of some of the instruction, and as they delivered the case to us from the police departments who were there, who had made the arrest, to even the DA's office. So you could get a sense that, okay, there certainly seems to be an aggressive desire to prosecute certain groups, and not so much on the other group. So even in Collin County, there are some biases that exist. There's certainly some prejudices that exist, and unfortunately they lead to some unfortunate discriminatory actions. And that's kind of some of the things I've experienced.
Goodness. David, can you tell me how you feel as you've seen those things play out, as you've been a part of the grand jury?
Well, right now I feel concerned. I have felt hopeful, and I'm hopeful that now I think congregations and people are paying attention. Historically, change has happened in our country when those individuals of the religious community took aggressive actions, and that's a reality. Sometimes that group of people who stood up against injustices, regardless of who the affected people were, when they stood up and said it's wrong, then we saw action. So I'm certainly encouraged that I think more and more people are paying attention. I have been discouraged at even our own community where, sometimes we're so concerned with our scriptures and our Bibles when we close them, we never take any of that when we leave, and that's been a concern for me, not just a white congregation led, but in our own historical congregations, African American. Our leaders have been silent for quite a while and let some injustices go unchecked. One of the things that was very disturbing to me is that where we've had incidents of concerning and questionable shootings and killings of young people, when the Department of Justice looked at those, they saw some systematic biases and prejudice and discriminatory actions in almost every one of those. And the very first thing the Attorney General did was eliminate that oversight, because he said it's too, it prevents law enforcement from doing their job if we continue that oversight. And that was just such a contradictory decision when we see that where they looked at it, they found that there were some things that led to some unfortunate events. But he said, we're going to stop that oversight, which to me felt like almost an endorsement of whatever their behaviors were. And certainly I didn't feel like would lead to us really looking at those things and correcting it. Some of it is training. Some of it is just simply, there's bad people doing everything. So we can't categorically say all victims were wrong and all officers were right. There's some mix of that, but that was concerning to me to say, hey, we're just not going to look at it anymore. And that came from a national position.
Goodness. One of the things you said was in both of our communities, we open our Bible, we read it, we study it, then we close it, and we move on beyond the church. We go on, I guess, about our business. As you think about the idea of building bridges between people, between Caucasians and people of color, between all people, how can we do a better job of building bridges?
I don't know what the right job is or what the right work is, but I think we have to truly look at events and look at situations from a Christian view and say what's right and what's wrong, and we gotta stop just kind of looking the other way. Recently, a young man was accused of sexually assaulting a young lady in college. And the young lady reported that to the police, and the young man was a very popular athlete at his school. And the young lady had friends, and apparently they had been close, the young lady and the man, and he come to separate from her, and she was not happy with that and said, hey, I'm going to do this. And she happened to text and share some of her thoughts with her friend. And she went to the police and filed charges, and there was a big national outcry. Well, her friend felt uncomfortable. She said, he's a good dude. He's a nice guy. He's not that guy. And she asked her parents, and her parents said, take whatever you have to the police. And she did, and immediately the case was resolved and the charges were dropped and everything was okay. But just as easy, those parents could have said, don't get involved, which happens so often. And that good guy, that good dude, would have had all the negativity associated with his name, his career affected, and of course he'd had a case now with law enforcement. And all because a good person chose to do nothing. And that's what happens so often. We find ourselves in a place where we just don't want to get involved.
Yeah.
And that's the danger we have, is that when good people do nothing, evil prevails. And that's where I think we just start by, when we see injustice, when we see wrong, speak on it.
Right.
Regardless of what group the victim is, regardless of that, we have to speak on it as Christians, and that's what I think we're compelled to do as Christians.
And so a way of building bridges is when you see that something is wrong, you speak out. You don't keep silent.
We have to. We have to at least, I said sometimes we just got to ask the question. Sometimes we just got to start, hey, we care enough to ask questions to gain more information so we can determine whether or not we need to take action. But if we stand silent, if we don't even ask the question, then we don't know. I'm about to start asking some questions about, hey, what does arrest data look like in Plano? What does it look for the minority groups?
Right.
What does that look like? What are the prosecution rates for, compared to arrest rates? And I think in Plano, in Collin County, we would be disturbed. I have no reservation what the data will show. It will show a disturbing, disproportionate number of minority, low-income groups arrested and prosecuted compared to other groups.
Right.
That I have no doubt it would show. And if we don't ask the question, then there's not even a change that will be considered.
Right.
Because it's all okay if nobody's questioning that information. So I think from Christians do what Christians do. We take care of the least of us. We speak and act for those who are not able to for themselves. And I don't think we can continue to justify turning a blind eye or not getting involved when we see and hear of injustice.
Right.
We're compelled to do so. If it happens to our neighbor or somebody across town, we're going to act. And I think that's what historically has resulted in change, is when good people did something.
That's helpful. When good people did something, regardless of the color of your skin.
Good people, not good white or good black or good Muslims or good Jews. When good people decided to do something, when righteous people said enough, wrong is wrong.
Yeah.
Low-income people are disproportionately affected more than wealthy people. They don't have the means for representation. They don't have the means and understanding. They don't interact with law enforcement and attorneys and doctors. And so when they get arrested or when they get caught in the judicial system, they're frequently burdened with just taking a deal. They take a plea deal. And you would be amazed at what that data looks like, and the number of people that simply are charged with so many different crimes.
Right.
That on a single traffic stop, young man put a marijuana roach, which is the residue of in his mouth, and all of a sudden that's a felony because it's concealment. You see what I'm saying? Now that law enforcement officer says, hey, you took 2 blocks to pull over, that's eluding, you concealed that, and all of a sudden this kid who rolled a stop sign, got pulled over, had a roach in there. He's got 3 or 4 felonies looking at him. He didn't have the wherewithal about getting an attorney, and he's taking a felony deal. You see? and it's up to that officer's discretion on what he charges him with.
Right.
So we've got a justice system that's, not as fair. Then unfortunately we see a continuation of that.
Right.
And those are the things that happen.
And one of the things I hear in what you're saying is that where there is an injustice, there's a calling to act. That whenever there are places of pain, it's a call to act. And one of the ways that we build bridges is not by turning a blind eye, but listening to understand and seeking to make a difference.
Absolutely. I think as a pastor, when or hear or understand that something may not feel right, and you've got the relationship with other pastors who care enough to call and ask. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
When you care enough to call and ask, or you care enough to say, hey, let's meet together and make sure that our high school kids are not being bullied or being mistreated as they're pulled over doing the things that kids do on Friday nights, regardless of what group that kids come from.
Right.
We need to make sure that law enforcement understands that, hey, we're paying attention. We're not going to let our kids be victims.
Right.
And say our kids. They're our kids, not those kids or these kids. Our kids.
Right.
We're not going to let them be victims. And I think when those relationships start coming and they start seeing a group of ministers that look like the community, not just the Douglas community and not just the other community, looks like the community, then I think they'll take notice and says, okay, well, they are looking and we need to get this right.
Right. Well, David, as I said, every time I meet with you, I walk away in awe, and I feel like I've been in the presence of someone extremely wise, and that certainly is true of today, and I really appreciate you taking time to come and visit with me and the words that you've shared with our congregation. So thank you.
Thank you very
for being a
much. I
friend.
appreciate the opportunity, and God bless everyone.
God bless you. Thank you.
Uh-huh.